The Middle East is facing one of its most dangerous military crises in decades as the United States and Israel dramatically increase their attacks against Iran, triggering a conflict that now threatens to engulf the entire region. What began as targeted strikes has quickly evolved into a widespread confrontation involving missile barrages, air raids, naval operations, and proxy battles across multiple countries. Cities across Iran have been rocked by explosions, while missiles and drones have crossed borders in a rapidly expanding conflict. Regional powers are scrambling to defend their territory, international leaders are urging restraint, and global markets are reacting to the possibility of a prolonged war. As the fighting intensifies, the world watches anxiously, fearing that this confrontation could spiral into one of the largest conflicts in modern Middle Eastern history. Rising tensions turn into open war. The conflict between Israel, the United States, and Iran has been building for years. Long-standing disputes over Iran's nuclear program, its support for armed groups across the Middle East, and repeated confrontations in Syria, Iraq, and the Persian Gulf have kept the region on edge. Tensions reached a breaking point when Israeli and American forces launched a coordinated series of strikes targeting Iranian military installations. The attacks reportedly focused on missile bases, drone facilities, and strategic command centers believed to be linked to Iran's military operations across the region. The strikes were described by officials in Washington and Jerusalem as necessary measures to stop Iran from expanding its military capabilities and threatening allies. Iran, however, saw the attacks as an act of war. Within hours, Tehran vowed retaliation and began launching missiles and drones toward Israeli territory and U.S. military installations across the Middle East. Waves of airstrikes across Iran. In the days following the initial strikes, U.S. and Israeli forces significantly expanded their campaign. Fighter jets and long-range missiles targeted several key Iranian cities and military zones. Among the reported targets were air bases, missile production facilities, radar installations, and infrastructure linked to Iran's Revolutionary Guard forces. Large explosions were reported in areas near Tehran, Isfahan, and other strategic regions. Iranian air defense systems were activated as they attempted to intercept incoming missiles and aircraft. Military analysts say the goal of these strikes appears to be weakening Iran's ability to launch long-range attacks and disrupting its command structure. However, the scale of the attacks has also raised fears about civilian casualties and the possibility of wider destruction. Iran's massive retaliation. Iran responded with a barrage of ballistic missiles and armed drones aimed at Israeli cities and American military bases. Air raid sirens sounded across several parts of Israel as missile defense systems intercepted incoming projectiles. The country's Iron Dome and other advanced defense technologies were deployed to prevent major damage. Meanwhile, Iranian missiles were reportedly fired toward several U.S. bases in the region, including facilities located in Iraq and the Gulf. Although many of the missiles were intercepted, some attacks caused damage and heightened fears of further escalation. Iran's leadership declared that the strikes were only the beginning of what they described as a broader response to foreign aggression. Hezbollah and regional militias joined the fight. One of the most concerning developments in the conflict has been the involvement of armed groups allied with Iran. The powerful Lebanese group Hezbollah quickly launched rockets toward northern Israel, opening another front in the war. Israel responded with airstrikes on Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon. These exchanges have already displaced thousands of civilians living near the border. Iran-backed militias in Iraq and Syria have also reportedly threatened to attack U.S. forces, raising the possibility that the conflict could spread into several additional battle zones. The network of groups aligned with Iran, often referred to as the axis of resistance, has the capability to strike multiple countries simultaneously, making the situation extremely volatile. Naval tensions in the Persian Gulf. The conflict has also extended into maritime territory. The Persian Gulf, one of the world's most important shipping routes, has become a potential flashpoint as naval forces from several countries move into the area. U.S. warships have increased patrols to protect commercial shipping lanes and regional allies. At the same time, Iranian naval forces have warned that they could target vessels connected to the United States or Israel. Military experts fear that even a small naval confrontation could disrupt the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage through which a significant portion of the world's energy supply travels. Any disruption to this route could send global oil prices soaring and trigger economic shockwaves around the world. Civilians caught in the crossfire. As the war expands, ordinary civilians across the region are paying the highest price. In Iran, families have rushed to shelters as air raid warnings echo through major cities. Some residents have fled urban areas amid fears that further bombings could strike densely populated neighborhoods. In Israel, missile alerts have forced people to take cover repeatedly as incoming attacks are intercepted by defense systems. Communities in Lebanon, particularly in the south, are also experiencing displacement as cross-border fighting intensifies. Hospitals across several countries are treating casualties from explosions, debris, and missile strikes. Humanitarian organizations warn that if the war continues to escalate, the region could face a major humanitarian crisis. Global leaders call for restraint. The rapid escalation has alarmed governments worldwide. Many world leaders have called for immediate de-escalation and diplomatic negotiations to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. International organizations have urged all sides to avoid targeting civilian infrastructure and to respect international humanitarian law. Diplomatic efforts are underway in several capitals to broker a ceasefire or at least reduce the scale of military operations. However, so far the rhetoric from the main parties involved remains defiant, and neither side appears ready to back down. The strategic stakes. Behind the intense fighting lies a complex web of geopolitical goals. For Israel, the main objective appears to be weakening Iran's military capabilities and preventing it from developing nuclear weapons. Israeli leaders have repeatedly warned that a nuclear-armed Iran would pose an existential threat to the country. For the United States, the conflict is tied to broader security concerns across the Middle East, including protecting allies and maintaining stability in global energy markets. Iran, on the other hand, views the strikes as an attempt to undermine its sovereignty and regional influence. Tehran has long positioned itself as a defender against Western and Israeli aggression, and its leadership has vowed to resist any attempt to weaken the country. Economic shockwaves. Beyond the battlefield, the war is already sending shockwaves through the global economy. Energy markets are particularly sensitive to events in the Middle East, and the escalation has caused oil prices to surge amid fears of supply disruptions. Airlines have begun rerouting flights away from conflict zones, and shipping companies are monitoring risks in the Persian Gulf. Financial markets have also reacted with volatility as investors assess the potential for prolonged instability. If the conflict continues to expand, economists warn it could trigger broader economic consequences worldwide. Could the war spread further? The greatest fear among analysts is that the conflict could evolve into a full regional war. Several scenarios could push the crisis to an even more dangerous level. Direct battles between US and Iranian forces. Large-scale involvement of regional militias. Attacks on critical energy infrastructure. Major naval confrontations in the Persian Gulf. Strikes on nuclear facilities. Any one of these developments could dramatically increase the scale of the conflict and draw more countries into the fight. A region at a critical crossroads. For decades, the Middle East has been shaped by rivalries, proxy wars, and shifting alliances. Yet the current confrontation between the United States, Israel, and Iran represents one of the most serious challenges to regional stability in recent history. As missiles fly and military operations intensify, diplomats are racing against time to prevent the situation from deteriorating further. The coming days and weeks could determine whether the conflict remains contained, or whether it grows into a far wider war that reshapes the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East for years to come. For millions of people living in the region, the hope is simple: that the fighting stops before the damage becomes irreversible.